Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about the poetry of Simon Armitage. And I'm reading the selections out of the Norton Anthology of English Literature. So this is a very small selection of Armitage's complete oeuvre. We have 4 poems. We have The Tiger, Horses, M62, The English Astronaut, and Beck. So Armitage is an interesting poet. He is in a way, he's maybe the characteristic or exemplary poet of Northern England, contemporary Northern English sensibility. Northern England, there's different regions of Northern England, but one of the sort of stereotypical characteristics of Northern England as opposed to Southern England, where London is, as opposed to like the Southwest, where Devon and Cornwall and places like this are. Northern England tends to be regarded as a fairly no-nonsense type place, in the sense that, like, Northern England is dotted with industrial or now post-industrial cities. People tend to be, stereotypically, people tend to be more plain-spoken, direct, honest, things like this. And so that sort of simplicity, that almost folk culture, almost like a sort of Dutch Protestantism, if that's a helpful reference for you. This sort of plain, straightforward, simple country type life, even for people who live in urban centers like Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham, places like this. And so that sort of directness, that sort of interest more in everyday life, rather than these sort of grand metaphysical speculations and things like this, it is stereotypical of Northern England. And Armitage takes that, but he goes beyond it. So a lot of Armitage's poems are about these very banal day-to-day experiences, but they come to mean more than just what they appear to on the surface. So I want to start by talking about his poem, The Tiger. This is a fairly simple plot line where the poet persona and his group of friends find this old tire laying by the side of the road, somewhat overgrown with weeds and grasses, standing water just sitting in it, and it's just sagged. It's an old tire, right? And they pick it up, they turn it on its side, and initially it's just sort of like crumpling, right? But they manage to get it rolling, and it eventually just takes off. It builds its own momentum, and they're trying to like guide it down the road as they're rolling it, and eventually it's got so much momentum, it's moving so fast that it just escapes them, and then it's gone. It goes off on its own, it disappears. So the storyline itself is this fairly simple, straightforward, everyday activity, something that people might do when they're bored. You find an old tire, you decide to amuse yourselves by rolling it along the road. Sure. But it's not just this. It's not just, this is a story, this is an experience. At the end of the long first stanza, where they've finally started getting this tire rolling. It's finally moving. It hasn't started picking up momentum yet, but it's going. We get these 3 lines. There and then we were one connected thing, 5 of us, all hands steering a tall ship, or one hand fingering a coin or ring. And so we have introduced this idea of creating a connection, that there is a link between the poet persona, the friends, and the tire. There is this almost universal connection. There's almost this transcorporeal, maybe, link between the people and the elements of this play. That idea of unity is really interesting here. But then we shift to the tire picking up its own speed. It picks up its own, it develops its own momentum. And they lose control of it. It's just rolling down the road under its own power. And we get this moment of imagination. We pictured an incident up ahead. Life carved open, gardens in half, parted, a man on a motorbike taken down, a phone box upended, children erased, police in an ambulance in attendance, scuff marks and the smell of burning rubber, the tire itself embedded in a house or lying in the gutter playing dead. So we have this moment of fantasy that reckons with the fact that what we do in the world may exceed what we intended it to do. That what happens in the world, our impact on the world, is not limited to what we intend or even could reasonably predict. This idea that because we have started this tire rolling down the road, it may create these catastrophes. It is this sort of awareness, this sense of the unpredictable, chaotic nature of life. But that unpredictable, chaotic fantasy is then confronted by the reality. Because the next lines we get are, but down in the village the tire was gone, and not just gone, but unseen and unheard of. Not curled like a cat in the graveyard, not cornered in the playground like a reptile, or found and kept like a giant fossil. Not there or anywhere. No trace. Thin air. So again, this fantasy of this destruction caused by the tire is confronted by the reality that the tire just never made it to town. It disappeared somewhere. And even this reality is tinged with fantasy. The idea that it just disappears, that it's gone into thin air. The reality almost certainly is that it crashes somewhere along the side of the road or ends up in a ditch or something like this, and just no one finds it. It's an old tire, no one is looking for it particularly. So we have that sort of that fantasy, that almost mystical fantasy of the tire's disappearance as an explanation coexisting with the rather banal reality that no one in the town has even seen it. But then one of the things that the last stanza does, this shortish last stanza does, is it sort of suggests that reality is not all there is to reality. That there's actually more going on. There's more depth, even in the somewhat banal daily existence of this tire. So the last stanza says, being more in tune with the feel of things than science and facts, we knew that the tire had traveled too fast for its size and mass, and broken through some barrier of speed, outrun the act of being driven, steered, and at that moment gone beyond itself toward some other sphere and disappeared. So again, this fantasy of the tire is actually gone. It's not just lost somewhere. It's not in a ditch. It's not by the side of the road. It has somehow broken through the physical laws of reality in order to transcend and to exceed the limits of space and time. And Armitage seems really interested in this sort of blending of the banal with the extraordinary. And the other poem in this short section that I really like is The English Astronaut, which very much blends that sort of banality with the exceptional, because astronauts are, by their very nature, unusual. There are a tiny, tiny number of them in the entire world, and often they are seen rather as celebrities because they do a rather dangerous, high-profile job. And yet this is very much an English astronaut. This is someone who is very much that stereotypical sort of dull, self-effacing, stay-at-home type figure. So I'm going to read you the whole poem and then talk a little bit about it. So this is the English astronaut. He splashed down in the rough seas off Spurn Point. I watched through a coin-op telescope jammed with a lollipop stick as a trawler fished him out of the waves and ferried him back to mission control on a trading estate near the Humber Bridge. He spoke with a mild voice. Yes, it was good to be home. He'd missed his wife, the kids, couldn't wait for a shave and a hot bath. Are there any more questions? No, there were not. I followed him in his Honda Accord to a little chef on the A1, took the table opposite, watched him order the all-day breakfast and a pot of tea. You need to go outside to do that, said the waitress when he lit a cigarette. He read the paper, started the crossword, poked at the black pudding with his fork. Then he stared through the window for long, unbroken minutes at a time, but only at the busy road, never the sky. And his face was not the moon, and his hands were not the hands of a man who had held between finger and thumb the blue planet and lifted it up to his watchmaker's eye. So I really like this poem, actually. Just, again, this sort of banal is the word I keep coming back to, but this sort of simple, everyday life of yes, it's good to be home. He missed his wife, the kids, couldn't wait for a shave and a hot bath. Like this is the astronaut's reaction to the experience of being in space, and it is very much like if you ever watch the show Very English Problems, there's an episode about travel, about vacationing abroad, and these are the kinds of things like, oh, it'd be nice to sleep in our own bed tonight. These are the stereotypically English things one says after a trip to, say, southern France. But this guy has gone to space, and it's the same sentiment. Then he drives this Honda Accord, and he goes to a Little Chef, which is a sort of, for people who don't know, Little Chef is a kind of roadway diner type place. He orders the all-day breakfast, a pot of tea, and he does these simple things that just a regular everyday person might do. But then we're reminded in the final lines that he's held between finger and thumb the blue planet and lifted it up to his watchmaker's eye. This amazing experience of being in space, of seeing the Earth from orbit, is counterbalanced by just the normal everyday life of this person.